Good morning. This is the Community Revitalization Show presented by RCI Community Funds. My name is Carl Dakin. I'm one of the principals in RCI Community Funds. We have yet to give me a label or a title or figure out what I'm good for. So we'll move on to Bill Houston, who's going to be acting as my co-host on the show this morning. Bill is an expert in investment crowdfunding, has extensive experience working with a variety of community programs, which we will draw upon as we talk with our guest for today's program, Steve Shaff. Today's topic is community engagement. And as we are preparing through RCI Community Funds to develop a series of investment funds dedicated to individual communities, it's very important to us, and not only important, but of critical to our success, is that we work with and through the community in collaboration with partners who may already be present and supporting those communities. And we have all seen different people, different programs, different projects where they come into a community with, here's what we're going to do that's going to help you out. And somehow that never quite turns out the way everybody wants. So for today's topic, we're going to talk about just what is community engagement. And and so I'm going to turn it over to Bill to give a little bit of background about himself and his past experience in community engagement. And then we'll ask all the hard questions of Steve. So, Bill, good morning.
Good morning. Greatly appreciate everyone spending this hour with us, learning about community revitalization. My name is Bill Houston. I'm an investment crowdfunding strategy consultant. I have a company called CrowdMax, and I am working with the RCI Community Fund. Really excited about this work. Really excited to actually get on the ground. Our strategy is very interesting and different because we are going to be on the ground working with people in collaboration in the community. So looking forward to this and looking forward to grilling Steve this morning.
Yes, nothing like a friendly interrogation to get the morning started. So,
Getting kind of
with
concerned
that,
with the tone of this conversation so far.
well, if we can't have fun this early in the day, then the rest of the day is just going to be tough. So, Steve, please introduce yourself, a little bit of your background on how you came to be here today, and then we'll put the first question on the table: is what is community engagement? We'll start with the easy questions, and we'll get harder from there.
All right, great. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here and also working with you and Bill and a couple of other collaborators to build out RCI Community Funds. So I look forward to a spirited conversation today. But hopefully we can talk about some of the things that are not necessarily what you would think about in terms of community investment, revitalization, or just improving our neighborhoods for the common good. So just a real brief. I started out as a 14-year-old working class kid from a typical white suburb. Moved into worked in my uncle's ice cream shop in Southwest Philadelphia when it was transitioning from an old Irish community into one where a Black family moved in. This is in the 70s. And then all of a sudden, the neighborhood just absolutely just flipped. So my whole high school years, I saw a neighborhood, a working class, stable neighborhood, turn into back then we called it a ghetto or slum. Today we call it inner city, underserved communities, whatever the case may be. And that just really made me realize, wow, this is amazing. This shouldn't happen. And why does it happen? And frankly, how do we change that? So fast forward decades later, and hopefully today I'll have some insights as to some of what I've learned, aside from the mechanics of rebuilding housing and so on, et cetera, that make for effective long-term community and revitalization outcomes.
So, we've been talking about different terms or labels that have been given to these communities I've heard the term underserved. I've heard the term economically distressed. I've heard the reference left behind. And we have kind of chosen to use a different term called disinvested. And can you explain basically to the audience what these terms mean in terms of why this community has this label, how it's measured, how people look at it, those kinds of things?
Mhm. Well, these are terms that use and change every 10, 15 years or so, that are somewhat of a euphemisms. They don't exactly describe exactly what's going on. But I think the term that we're using, disinvestment, is kind of a real practical term, meaning that these are communities that just don't get the investment that they need. And we know these communities are worth investing in because the precursor to gentrification is finding a disinvested community that has the right, let's say, characteristics that then, when I'll be straight up, when the white people find out and when the money finds out, they come into these communities and therefore they invest in the communities, whether it's good people, community oriented investments. That's a whole other hour conversation. But the bottom line here is disinvested communities, which we know where they're at, basically underserved. Well, here's that term again, underserved communities, but communities that just are forgotten, just even though they're worth investing in. And frankly, the moral imperative is, in a country like ours with our resources, let's do it right in a way where, frankly, rich people still will be rich, returns will still be there, the economy won't fall apart, but ultimately the common good is served because we have a much stronger foundation, whether it's housing, wellness centers, education for our kids. Education for our kids aren't exactly academic. Alternatives, trade schools, art schools, all these things we know work. No mystery, they work. The question is, why don't we have this built into our fabric the way we do in other, frankly, industrial communities, particularly in Europe, Australia, and certainly struggling here in America.
So the, there are, I guess you call it attributes, characteristics of these neighborhoods. They typically are poor by any definition, meaning that they don't bring that much money home. The average median income is very low, below the averages. And this means they have less buying power, and it directly impacts their ability to have a higher quality of life. So when I look at these communities, I kind of put on my private economic developer hat, and I say, well, what can we do that would elevate everything within the community? And typically we start talking about jobs, and not jobs outside the community. We're talking about jobs inside the community because that's necessary for the community to build wealth on a collective basis, in addition to the individual wealth of everybody who lives within the community.
Mhm.
And Bill is a person who advocates the concept of community capital. And Bill, if you would share a little bit of information about that important topic and how it relates to determining if a community is invested, disinvested, or distressed in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point that you bring up. So we already know that this exists. There's probably a myriad of reasons why it exists. But I think what we're looking for here are the solutions, and one of the solutions is community capital. Um, One of the interesting facts that I've come to learn as a community organizer, as an investment crowdfunding strategy consultant, is that within these communities, there money exists, right? The money exists. I think about terms like food desert, retail desert, pharmacy desert. Those stores, those places where people are able to purchase goods and services, they don't exist within those communities. But we all realize that people are buying medicine. We all realize that people are buying food and and other retail items. So community capital allows people within the community to source capital, investment capital from within the community or around or in the surrounding community, right? It doesn't necessarily just have to be people in that specific census tract, but people who live in the community, organizations who lend into the community, foundations that are able to bring money into those communities. So community capital is simply capital, investment capital that is sourced from the community. When we think about community capital, one of the things that I find is really lacking is not necessarily people's understanding of community capital, because they know that they spend their money, right? They know that. But what I think is lacking is the infrastructure to create community capital projects to for that money to be funneled into the communities. As an investment crowdfunding strategy consultant, one of the things that I obviously understand is that prior to 2016, May 16th, 2016, that there was no way for people to actually invest in their communities, right? Community capital didn't exist in a very simplified way. Let me take that back a little bit. Community capital did exist, but in order to start community capital projects, it was very expensive, and it was very complex. And the Jobs Act of 2012 and investment crowdfunding allowed that process to be simplified. And the National Coalition for Community Capital has now developed a hybrid model of Reg CF regulation crowdfunding and community funds, which makes this much more simpler and quicker. So when we think about community capital, when we think about community revitalization, um, the legal and compliance infrastructure has been built and developed. So my question would be, Steve, how since that infrastructure is there, how do we get people off the on ramp and onto that infrastructure?
Well, that's a very good question and kind of a frustrating one, but I think one that's really beginning to be addressed a little bit more, given that the crowdfunding some mechanisms, which is a really relatively concept in its infancy around 2012 or so. The crowdfunding concept was in, or I should say maybe it was allowed in 2016 or so. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill. But in any case, so that mechanism was something that was set up that would really help bring capital to the community in small chunks. And it's a really good concept that I think it makes a lot of sense. And I've been following the crowdfund concept for quite some time. I've gotten to know some of the pioneers over the years, Michael Schumann, Jenny Casson, and Devin Thorpe, others who are really advocating for all this. And of course, that's how, Bill, you and I met, because you are, a champion in this area. But one of the problems with the crowdfunding concept is, one, aside from folks like us that tune in on programs like this, it's just really not known out there. It's just we're really talking to ourselves. The amount of activity is not relatively, minuscule compared to what it is. Yet the impact, when people find out that, hey, I can invest $100,000 into my own community, where I can improve my own community, where I literally can benefit from my investment and get a return, what's not to like? The problem is, if you talk to even sophisticated, tuned in people, they just don't know this is here. So to me, crowdfunding, which is a big component of the RCI Community Funds, because we're aggregating capital sources from various sources, but the crowdfunding part is what excites me, because to me, the solution is, and they're improving the mechanisms and the cost to get involved. The solution is, how about we tap into an army of likely investors who are already investing into things for the common good, like activists who support a candidate or a cause. They'll kick in $100 or $1,000 or $10 a month or whatever the case may be, and never expect a return, except hopefully for change. So my thinking is, and one of the benefits of an RCI, a community fund, is, and a big part of my background is, in addition to my social enterprise, community housing and development here in DC. Coincidentally, being in DC means I have access to the national political world. The idea is, how can we tap into the sleeping giant that's out there that has no idea that if we reached out to these activists by the millions, literally we could do that with our networks, and let them know that, hey, that $100, that $1,000 you have sitting in your mutual funds is absolutely investing in things that are so opposed to your convictions. Why do you keep doing that? And the reason is because no one thinks about, oh, where's my money being invested in? Some do. I'm not discounting those folks that really pay attention to this, but that's few and far between. It's complicated. Who wants to worry about where your money's going? So the idea is, how do we tap into that? Not only how do we tap into on a large scale, but how do we get them to understand that their money is going to be used better, and this could be invested in your own community. So what businesses, what kind of investments can we make in your own community? So in other words, not only should we tap into this army to generate much more of a capital pool, which RCI Community Funds will use as one of several different types of capital. What about projects in your neighborhood, or what about businesses that should be started up and can take advantage of the kind of expertise that Bill, you, and many others have developed to help with this? So we have to let the secret out. We have to build this scale to be a much more of a component of this. And it's going to take a little while, but these avenues are here. And part of our mission with RCI Community Funds, as well as each of our principals' individual backgrounds, can add up to really help ramp this up and place it in the right kind of projects within the communities. So that's another advantage too, is we could be a conduit, not only to help raise capital, but also put into communities strategically that do more than just housing, but also have other community impact adjacent to that housing, for example.
Yeah, so RCI Community Funds is working with a community investment model that was developed by the National Coalition for Community Capital. And it basically calls for establishing a fund, which means you have to raise money. And there is I will call it a challenge in that, as Bill described it, we want to use community capital. We want the residents of the community to be the largest investors in a fund. In fact, it would be a perfect world if they could provide the entirety of the money that would go into that fund. But we know in reality today that we're not quite there yet, or we may be a long ways away from there. And so we're going to be looking for money from outside the community. We call it external money as opposed to internal money, just as we talk amongst ourselves. And as Steve's describing, we are identifying different groups who have an interest in the mission of rebuilding these communities and asking them to support by investing into a fund where the money can be deployed and invested into that local community. All well and good, and I think we're going to come back to this topic on another day on this show. But now that we're assuming that we're going to have this fund and there's going to be money sitting in a bank account somewhere, we want to invest it into the community. And how do we get the community involved in that discussion of where should the money go? What do they think would be the things that would help them the most? And to some degree, we may be dealing with, we may see disagreements. We may have people thinking the money should go left instead of right on a particular project. And so how do we get the community involved in this whole discussion so that we're not simply outsiders mandating or pushing money downhill, but we're working with the community to come up with common goals?
This is my favorite part of the work that I've done for literally decades. If you want to reinvest and rebuild communities with everyone in mind, you have to literally physically be in the communities. You have to be able to walk down alleys and see what's going on. You have to go at various times of the day. You have to be able to read a community before you can come in and say, especially me, the white boy coming into these communities, say, here I am, I'm a real estate developer with a nonprofit mentality. Everyone, their mother is going to be skeptical. And anytime someone like me would walk into these communities, it's like nothing good will come out of it. So I think, there you go, Bill. So one of the first things I found out that, and for me, it was just natural because you might gather that I didn't start out as a businessman. I wanted to work in social justice. I came to DC to work on a PhD and knew that even with a PhD, I'd never make money because social justice and activism doesn't pay well. I accidentally got into a real estate deal when I was living in the late 80s. Back then, we call it the hood. Okay. And then realized, wow, you could buy real estate and development without having a job or money legally, I mind you. So I took some time out and I got into it. And then one of the first things I realized is just because I'm a good guy coming in and try to help with your community, that is the absolutely worst approach. The first thing we have to remember is, as much as I'm an idealist, you got to be a realist to get your idealism outcomes. So I was one of the few people that really can swim the sharks and think business in a business savvy way, but also with the hope that ultimately my work will have community outcomes that benefits everyone. But you still have to have a return, a financial return. So part of what I learned very quickly is how and why would you go in these communities and not understand the strengths and the power that you have to ignite in that community to make sure that your work is going to have a long-term effect. I've seen projects in communities that sound good, they're done, but they're done like with outsiders kind of doing their own things and coming with the attitude of, we're here to help you people. Now, you know what that means. White people don't understand that nuance. When you come in, and I had an investor say this at a community meeting that I assembled, and he came in and said, I'm so excited to work with you because we're here to help you people. And I just put my head down. And after that meeting, it was the first time I actually yelled at an investor who had a lot of money, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I said, you just absolutely insulted, these folks. You had no idea. And by the way, we can't work here because you've already tainted or revealed your kind of perspective. My point is, if we're going to invest, we want to have as much, mitigate as much risk as possible. And I found, without a doubt, if you don't authentically work with the community and respect and show dignity and prove that you're not just, someone coming in to rape and plunder and these communities, because again, gentrifiers go into communities where they make a lot of money, right? And in DC, just as a quick aside, the whole city in the 80s, I knew would gentrify. And sure enough, it's gentrified. It's like San Francisco. So we have to go out of DC or even up to Baltimore, 30, 40 minutes up the road, because Baltimore is much more affordable. My point here is you have to create working relationships. So one of the first things I do literally in a neighborhood that I'm not familiar with, I literally walk around. And again, some of these neighborhoods, when a white boy is walking around, they're either looking to buy something on the corner illegally, or they're looking to arrest someone. People couldn't figure me out. So people would come up to me, or I'd go up to them and have conversations. That's the first start. And if you have enough conversations, you start beginning to get a kind of authentic sense of the people who you literally see in the community or outside that corner shop. And then when you realize there's some potential here, then you really look at all the stakeholders in that community and find out where the real authentic commitment to change is. And it's not always the well-meaning nonprofit that is going to be your best ally. So my whole point here is you have to really identify those collaborators. Because again, outside players coming in with a bucket full of money, that doesn't work. Or if you do housing, it just doesn't last. So the whole idea is with community engagement, you're going to have a much more substantive, long-term development where community wealth stays in the community. And when people who are part of that community wealth elect to move out of that community, at least they can take part of it with them, which is what we're all striving for. So my point here is that as a savvy real estate developer working in the most troubled communities in DC, we did some long-term stuff. Now I've been around long enough where literally decades have gone by. We can look at these communities and say, wow, this one time it was an illegal shopping center right on the corner where there's traffic jams on the street that you couldn't get through because there was so much traffic. My point here is that when you bring all these players together and realize there's enough willingness, aside from the community's got to have the ability to create housing, and not just housing, you have to do jobs, but you also have to have Black businesses too, because people want to frequent, businesses that their neighbor owns or their neighbor works at. So you need to bring all these things together. So my perspective always was, we need to combine sectors. So my company that I founded as a progression role is Community Vision Solutions. And our goal is to really bring all these sectors together: housing people, faith-based communities, nonprofits, so on, et cetera, grassroots activists, elected officials, everyone, and really bring them all together. That is really tough to do. It's really hard to bring all those sectors together. But once you do, and I found when we did that, that's when we were able to rebuild communities with everyone involved. And again, to this day, 20, 30 years down the line, we look at these communities and see healthier, stronger homeowner kind of opportunities. So that's what we're looking at with our goals here is not just invest, but really create change. And by the way, the issues we have in my local inner city issue are the same in thousands of communities throughout America. So unfortunately, disinvested communities is a huge opportunity to rebuild. And rebuilding these communities is a multi-billion-dollar effort, but it's just not dollars. It's how can you do it where absolutely everyone can benefit? Or how can we do it in a way where we do zero waste housing as a standard, not as an elective, and all these other things that really help create cohesive communities, sense of community, community pride. And by the way, just a quick thing, I started out as an affordable housing developer. Once you fix housing, we're good to go. And I realized, no, soon was found out that's not the case. I accidentally got into a small little arts effort that I had no idea of what they were doing. But the bottom line is I helped start a community arts center in my own community, right outside DC on the Maryland side. And long story short, I found that, wow, arts is a huge component that bring people together. It's cheap and funky because artists go where it's cheap and funky. But I soon learned, fortunately, very quickly, that arts is a great component and has to be part of this because it brings people together, creates jobs, creates a sense of community, a whole bunch of other things. And it also creates return on dollars. So the governments began to realize, wow, investing in the arts actually is not a throwaway. It brings back a lot of return for your dollar. So when you take all these things and bring it together, then you can have the ability to really build strong communities. Our art center in my little town, we're a border town. We went through the crack wars. We were pretty affected by that on my little town. But we had this great arts network here, or community. And then we set up this community center, Joe's Movement Emporium, which serves over 100,000 people a year, young people, everyone. But what was really valuable there is not only it brought arts to the community, people began to come in here and set up that small little coffee shop that we've been waiting for all these years, or this or that and the other. So literally, 20 years down the line, we have an economic driver that not only drove things in our little town, but throughout the whole gateway, what we call the gateway corridor, up from here to College Park, which is about 8 miles up the road. So this whole corridor has been redeveloped based on arts economy. And if we did this here in our funky little community, you could do it anywhere. And that's the whole idea is let's create a reason why people want to stay and live in communities. Let's create our own business owned by by community members, and also make sure that everyone gets involved and go and elect their own candidates. That's another part of here. People don't like me to talk too much about politics, but again, empowerment requires all these things to come together. All right. I can talk another 4 or 5 hours about this if you'd like.
I know, but
sorry.
I want to
go off in the tangent.
I'm interrupting politely here because I have some questions that I want to kind of zero in on here and get Bill's input on this. But my experience in working with community projects is that one of the pushbacks is when you start talking about doing something in the community, people start dividing themselves into groups of winners and losers. And when they put a project on the table, they look at it and they go, I don't get anything out of that. So if you put in a brand new housing project and they don't live in it, they don't own it, then they're going, somebody else is making money, I get no benefit, and they disconnect. They don't support it. They may even talk bad about it, even though there's nothing negative in it for them. And Bill, yeah, I'd like your input on this. On how do you get people? Which projects, do you think, as Steve's described, if you put an art project into community, most people assume that they can all benefit from that. Where if I'm doing a particular business, a particular property retrofit, anything along that line, then I still hear the winners and losers comment is like, well, yeah, those guys, somehow are getting preferential treatment and I'm left out again. And that's part of the challenge I see is getting everybody to think as a community and work together.
So, so a different perspective on that is that living in one of those communities myself, right? People do want things, right? People do want things differently, and understanding that I need to be a stockholder, right,
Mhm.
and not just a stakeholder. You can't come into the community and tell me that you are going to improve the stores that extract my dollars. And so they look better, they're cleaner, they're nicer, but at the end of the day, there's still the extraction of my dollars. What investment crowdfunding does, and using that, with community capital in a community fund, what you are now doing is you are now kind of changing the paradigm, and you are saying that you will benefit from this store because you have the opportunity to invest in this store, and you're going to get a return, whether that's debt, whether that's equity, whether that's a revenue share, that you now become an economic player, a shareholder in this, as opposed to just being a stakeholder. And I think a lot of times when people come into these communities, I don't think they really understand the disinvestment, right, at a macroeconomic level. Right? That money is going somewhere. And you think about the Community Reinvestment Act, right, which is a law. And it's a law that has no teeth. And banks still have other people's money that comes from those communities, right? Because there are no community banks, and they still don't reinvest in those communities, even though by law they have to, but the penalties are so small and unsubstantial that they don't care. So when you think about, from my perspective, um at nighttime, when I need to go to the grocery store, when I need to go to a retail outlet and I have to travel miles, I certainly understand that, right? I certainly understand the impact, just like all my neighbors understand the impact. And I think understanding that if we did stand up a community store and the community was a winner, as well as myself individually,
Mhm.
and that there's a pathway for that now, right? I mean, that pathway didn't exist until 2016, and even then, not many people were using the pathway, and not many people are using the pathway now, considering the power that it has for community-led economic development. So again, Steve, a question that I would have for you, kind of to Carl's point, is how do you educate people about keeping that money, that capital inside the community, right, without going deep into economics, right? Because people aren't economists. People have very short attention spans. um, but if I'm going to make money, if you could tell me that really quickly how I'm going to make some money, then I'm going to be interested in that, right? So engaging with people on the ground, and people understand that if people live in the United States, they understand that you need money, right, in order to live. And that if I keep my money and I keep investing where I live, then where I live is going to improve. But if I keep investing where someone else lives, right, then their community is going to improve and mine's not. How do you kind of do that messaging through community engagement where you keep it pretty simple and pretty straightforward, because people have such short attention spans, and let them know that there is a different solution?
Well, chances are that if you're interested or live in a community that is not necessarily economically as robust as you like, you're going to find opportunities in your own community. So if you want to invest in your own community, the opportunities are there. The question is, what's needed to help these businesses come together? And again, this is where it's just not capital; it's other collaborators come in and help make this happen. So if you want that nice little coffee shop that everyone would frequent in your community and it's not there, then connect with your community and your neighbors and figure out, or your business community there, and figure out what's needed to get someone in there. Chances are someone probably wants to come in your neighborhood and set up that coffee shop. So this is where the community comes in, and you have to start really bringing together. We started the Art Center because it was literally artists and other neighbors coming together in my community saying, "We're a lot of artists are here. Where is the Art Center? Where's the space?" And it was through that effort that we created what is called Joe's Movement Emporium, and one of the best economic drivers, community impact organizations we've had that we're very proud of. And literally thousands of our children have gone through Joe's and learned things that they don't learn in school anymore because there's no arts, dance, music. So the idea is that chances are very good that there's something in your community that you can invest in. It's just not bricks and mortar too, by the way. Does your community need better ways to manage, recycling and things like that? Recycling businesses are the future. I mean, deep recycling businesses that will grow. So these are all things that most communities in America could incorporate. Our role is to help put this together, help bring support, help identify investments on the ground. But if you don't want to say invest in something we're doing in Baltimore, but you've got something going on in your area, then let's talk about what we can do in your area. So that's one way to really just create an echo chamber of this kind of local economic development.
Well, and Bill, I really like the phrase stakeholders to stockholders. I think that this is a very critical catchphrase that explains in very short terms that we have to create investment opportunities for people in the community that they can invest in. And we have to build the infrastructure, which involves investment crowdfunding. We have to frame businesses or real estate or other investable objects, projects, so forth. And then we have to make people aware that here's an opportunity, one, to create a business in your community, which will create jobs, which can pay for housing, which can pay taxes in the community. Mm-hmm. But I think the point you're making, Bill, is that if they see an investment in something made by somebody else and they have no ability to participate, then this is the same disinvested, in some ways left behind, pass me by kind of a thing. They're like, why would I get excited about something I have no ability to have a direct participation in? And so, Steve, knowing that we want everybody in the community to now become stockholders in one or more of the investments that are available in the community, how do you see we get that word out? When you formed this artist group, was there somebody who stood up and said, everybody come over here and let's talk, or how did you get that conversation started?
Again, the community I moved to from deep inner city DC decades ago, when I moved here, it had a reputation of being kind of cheap and funky. And because of that, there's a lot of artists living here. And as someone connected to my community, a lot of artists saying, boy, we really need a place, either studio or something to work out or even sell our stuff. I said, well, our little Main Street downtown here, why don't we get a building and do something like that? And they're like, oh, yeah, this would be great. And then I realized artists aren't the best business people. They're like, well, how will we do that? So I took the initiative and I leased a building for multiple years with the intent to bring artists in at like $50 a month. And they're all very happy I did that. But the idea was that they're artists. They're not into business. I'm a business person wanting to change communities, and I began to realize, wow, arts are a great way to create buzz. I'm thinking artists next door, the secondhand shop or the antique shop next door, the coffee shop, and that's how you build, this, and that's exactly what happened. So because I was a business person that really was for the community, I went out and I committed to rent the space for years to make it an artist group. Unfortunately, when when I did that and made a commitment, very few artists came up because even $50, I'm just saying the number. Well, I think at the time, $50 a month was even too much for artists. Long story short, a couple dancers, popped up and said, "We love this space. Can we take over the whole thing?" And I said, "Well, if you want to do that, then can you do children's program and this and that and the other?" And that's how that started. And then a year or two later, then the first coffee shop came and this and the other. People had great culture to come to. I live in a wonderfully multicultural community. And then white people began to come to places that they never frequented before and began to realize that Black culture is something that they've been missing their entire lives. When I was a kid and working in my uncle's ice cream store, I got to see that because I was physically in the neighborhood and got exposed to Black community. And I'm thinking, boy, white people are missing out. Anyway, so that's kind of how you do it. So that, I think one artist said, we really need a spot there. And that was really the spark that allowed us to bring the right kindling together, so to speak, that took off to the point where not only is this a model, but in my background, I've replicated this with other collaborators 2 or 3 times in communities where it became a hub. This stuff works. It's not magic. It's not theoretical. And it's also human. People want to come together. They want to rub elbows. They want to get to know their neighbor.
So as we are completing the design of our initial community investment fund, following the guidelines established by the National Coalition for Community Capital, 60% of the money raised into the fund will be invested directly into acquisition of real estate. And we are looking at residential, commercial, and community space. And so there is an opportunity, as Bill's described it, for stakeholders to become stockholders where they can invest in the fund. The minimum investment in the fund will be set at $100 with the hope that everyone in the community will be able to afford to buy at least a stock in the fund and go that direction. But then as the fund invests money into real estate, at that point, our design is for the tenants in the residences, in the commercial buildings, to engage in a rent to own or lease to own type of policy so they can become stockholders in the buildings in which they reside or in which they operate their commercial enterprise. But 40% of the money from the fund will go into local businesses. And so not only can a resident invest in the fund itself, which gives them kind of a portfolio or a pool of investments, but they can invest alongside of the fund in every one of the businesses that
Okay, that's not me.
we're going to be investing in and within the community. So we have, so far in our design, we have 3 different ways in which a resident can put their money into something and become part of that. They can globally participate in the fund. They can become a tenant in one of the spaces that we acquire. And then they can also invest in the businesses alongside of our investment as those businesses seek additional capital to get up and grow. And I see this providing these and communicating these to the community is going to be so different from what they may have experienced in the past, where, as you say, somebody comes in, buys a building and retrofits it. They have no stake in that other than it's nice to have it in the community. They may or may not be able to afford to live in that building. That's where gentrification comes into play, where they come in and they charge rates that are higher than what the community can afford. but they have no ownership in it. So, Bill, I think your point here is that as we message this to the communities, we have to constantly pound on the table that you can become a stockholder, you can become a member, a shareholder in one or more of these different types of activities, which means you're in the game. You're not on the stands. You're not a bystander. You're not sitting out this one. You get to go in the field. We're going to hand you the football here and let you be a star in your own neighborhood because you are contributing to the success of the neighborhood and you stand to benefit because you are a stockholder rather than just watching somebody else make money.
Yeah, to that point, I want to go back to something that Steve said about being in that I think it was West Philadelphia community, and and seeing Black culture. Well, today the internet, right, has democratized the access to that culture,
Mhm.
right? Just like investment crowdfunding has the opportunity to democratize access to investment, right? It's not like people did not know about Black music. It's not like it wasn't popular. It was just controlled, right? The dollars were controlled by a very small group of people who determined what kind of music was made, what kind of music would be popular, what kind of books would be made. And today, and I think this is a great analogy because today, with the internet, I don't necessarily have to become a billionaire, right? Our show here doesn't have to sell to 10 billion people for us to be successful. If we can build a crowd of people who are willing to support us, then we can be successful. And understanding that concept in crowdfunding, in community revitalization, and investing in community funds is that your fund doesn't have to become BlackRock in order for it to be successful. It can be successful if it is producing businesses, creating jobs, and putting a return in people's pocket, right? So scale is one thing, but actually having those mechanisms is something that's quite different. And I think that's the messaging that has to be kind of push through there. And then Steve, the other thing that you said that's quite interesting to me is the author Ta-Nehisi Coates from Baltimore. He talks about the legal plunder of Black communities, and you think about again housing. People live somewhere in Black communities. They live in structures. It's just that they don't own those structures.
Mhm.
They are paying rent to someone in 1968. Before 1968, it was legal to discriminate against Black people in housing. In 1968, President Johnson signed the law that said that's no longer legal. At that time, Black home ownership hovered around 41%. In 2024,
Mhm.
Black home ownership hovers around 41%. There are some structural issues that are in place. And my view of that is instead of consistently fighting those structural systems that are already in place. Investment crowdfunding, community investment funds allow people to take this into their own hands and create what it is that they want to create, what they need to create, and still
Yeah.
benefit from that economically. And their communities are no longer necessarily being plundered by the big dollars. And no company, right? No big company today started out as a multi-billion-dollar operation. They
Mhm.
grew into that. And in understanding that this gives you the opportunity to start to grow and build wealth over time.
Yeah, exactly. Statistics easily show that communities that have the highest percentage of home ownership are your strongest communities. So obviously, in communities where the residents don't, and it's a high a rental kind of community, those are your probably your most challenged. So that's obviously we tried to increase Black home ownership. It was kind of increasing until the housing market blew up. But it's really key that you feel that you have ownership. Now, if you don't physically own your own property, but You own the fact that you can walk down the corner and see your friends at the local coffee shop, or you can take your children to the dance studio where once a week they get so much culture that they would never get. Well, you may not own your house, but you feel connected to your community. So the sense of community is incredibly important to everyone's well-being. So if you can't afford that particular house, but you feel connected to that community, then you're going to have a stronger, a healthier community that then could bring in other parts that would be attracted to stronger communities. And that's how you do it. It takes a while. But the problem is that the capital, the alignments just haven't been there. So communities that have promise are often find their way on the radar of gentrifiers who come in and say, look at this lovely hipster kind of place. You know the process. First, the gay community comes in because they're used to being discriminated against. And I'm talking very generally. I don't mean to offend anyone, but they'll buy in these communities because they're more comfortable than most. And then they fix up their house, and you ride down and you realize, whoa, this is what a fixed up house looks like in this community. Then the dual income, no children start moving in, then hipsters all start. So then within a few years, you've lost the ability to take your community and make it a part of the community that has been living there for literally generations. So that's the question: is how can we help bring the capital to a community we know has the ingredients to improve without going full-blown gentrification? That's the missing part here. The nonprofit revitalization paradigm will never work because you need capital up front. And that's kind of a big priority. RCI fund is, let's put the capital up front and then work with communities that we feel or they feel are worthy of this capital, so that we can go in there, get involved with projects, and not take 2 or 3 years by well-meaning faith-based communities or community-based organizations to put enough capital together to get that project going. But in the meantime, there's 2 or 3 years, the gentrifiers come here and just pay cash and they blow it out, and then you've lost the community. It's a very complicated process, but at the same time, too, it's pretty simple. The more people feel connected to their community, the healthier it is for everyone. Crime goes down. Transportation is less, the environmental impact, all these things. So localism is a big thing, and crowdfunding is a good tool that localism can really benefit by. And if you want to read anything about localism, one of my senior advisors, Michael Schumann, a pioneer in crowdfunding, has written books about why localism is more than just a local issue. It's really an international issue. The point being is sense of community is really important. And again, that's one of the first things I look for when I go into community I'm not familiar with, to see if can we bring the leaders together and spark it with bringing things that have been missing, and then building out with a patient process. 10, 20, 30 years. Joe's, our dance studio, has been around for 25 years. So this didn't happen overnight, but Joe has spurned so much economic development. It was a slow process. But if we went and started this with like conventional money, it would never happen because people want to return right away. So that's important too. Another ingredient, factor about crowdfunding that I think has real benefits, because it can be patient, slow, and it's not
Yeah,
so.
so I see that as we go to build the fund, once we're ready to start our own Reg CF investment crowdfunding campaign, it'll be necessary for us to use every available communication channel to talk to every single resident in the community and give them a chance to become a stockholder, and explain that this is no longer the old game where everything passes them by, but here's a chance for a relatively small amount of money. I say that carefully because if you're only making 25, 30,000 a year, $100 is still a significant amount of money. And it may be coming out of a household budget. It isn't like they have this money sitting idle, doing nothing. But we want to give everybody an opportunity and explain how they can become an investor, and how investment in the fund is an opportunity, how they can become a rent-to-own, lease-to-own, building wealth through the real estate projects that the fund will invest in, and then also investing in these businesses, whether it's a community arts center, whether it's a coffee shop. And now they get to vote with their dollars on what goes into that community by investing in these particular businesses. But they're part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And I would encourage our audience to, it's a two-way street. If you've got some things you're working on or is not making enough progress for you in your community, let us know. If we can help out, great. If not, we could probably refer you to someone. But that's important too, knowledge. And this is where I appreciate working with Bill is we have to educate our community about why it makes sense to invest in a community or why community dollars stay in. So there's going to be a lot of consumer and community education too, which is very important. And again, that's something that will be part of our business model is make sure people understand why it makes sense to, even with $100 investment, to do this in your own community.
Yeah, so through this program, the Community Revitalization Show, our intent is to share information week to week. We'll be back here every Thursday into the future with different guests. We're going to be bringing in other people on different topics that relate to community investment, community revitalization. We will be bringing in organizations who have already engaged in this type of activity. Some of them have already been successful in multiple communities, and we will be looking to them as potential partners with plug-and-play solutions that will, upon investment, we're not talking years down the road before you see a positive outcome. We may be talking only weeks and months before jobs are created, new programs are put in place because they've already been there, done that so many different times. And in addition to this weekly show, we are publishing a newsletter, which we invite you to subscribe to, which, get it on the screen. This is a weekly newsletter, goes out on Wednesdays. Within this, we are trying to become a curator, a point of contact, a referral source, and to tell success stories of what's being done in communities across the United States where they've already started something. Somebody's already stepped forward and making things happen. And we want to share this information because it may serve as a guideline or an example for you to use in your own community. And as we're building this body of knowledge, we plan to start an academy where we will be putting on educational programs that will be more regimented in their presentation and content. But again, our point is to help everybody who's being successful share their stories, their best practices with everybody else, because there are so many communities that need help today that our work to set up community funds, we're going to have to figure out how to scale and replicate as quickly as possible so that these communities can get invested dollars into them and start the rebuilding process. So with that, we're coming to the end of the hour. I will start with my co-host, Bill, and say, Bill, do you have any final comments from today's conversation that you think would be good to share with the audience?
Yeah, the one thing that I would say is that you become educated, understand the economics of your community, understand the economics of your dollars, where they go, who you invest in, who they support over the long term, and then kind of once you see the truth about that, you'll be ready to make the changes necessary.
Thank you for that, Bill. So Steve, last words on community engagement.
I'd say there's a lot of power in information and collaboration. There's a lot of avenues that are opening up where we can come together and do things as more of a collaborative that would benefit many communities in our country.
Well, Well, thank you, both of you today, for being on this Community Revitalization show. Thank you to the audience who was listening in today. And this show is being recorded. It will be available for replay at another time if the current moment isn't the best time in your day to watch. So you can also see it on YouTube and on Facebook. So thank you again to the audience, and we'll see you next week.